President Trump has launched his initiative to reopen America. In the coming weeks, Americans across the country took to the streets calling for changes to be made now. But while some demonstrators say they're in favor of the administration, others criticized its response to the coronavirus pandemic. RT's Rachel Blevins gives us the details.
Many Americans are taking to the streets, voicing their opposition to the ongoing restrictions in the name of stopping the coronavirus. Over the weekend, demonstrations were carried out in Florida, Virginia, Michigan, Maryland, Texas, California, and 10 other states. In Idaho, over 1,000 protesters broke social distancing protocols as they gathered outside of the state capitol building in Boise. Many of them waved signs that read, "There's no justification for taking individual freedom in the guise of public safety, and poverty kills." The state's Republican governor has promised to begin lifting some restrictions on businesses while the stay-at-home order remains in effect until the end of the month. The same message was heard in Indiana, where dozens gathered outside of the governor's mansion with signs that read, "No more nanny state. All jobs are essential, and we want work, not welfare." Hundreds of protesters were also seen outside of the Texas state capitol building in Austin, despite the Republican governor's promise to begin lifting restrictions as early as this week. Their signs reflected opposition to the restrictions on businesses, mandatory vaccines, and the current lockdown, which they feel is infringing upon their constitutional rights.
I think the government has overstepped. We have rights. We have a personal responsibility for our health, and we don't need them to tell us how to do it. And I think it's just a shame that we can't make those choices for ourselves.
Demonstrations in Denver, Colorado saw protesters both for and against the ongoing lockdown, which led to arguments in the crowd. Counter-protesters included medical workers who stopped traffic in the streets. One nurse was quoted as saying the protests felt like a slap in the face to medical workers. Protesters opted to keep their distance from one another in Arizona, where cars circled the Capitol building in Phoenix to form a gridlock. Their criticism was aimed at the state's Republican governor, with signs that said, "Let businesses and consumers decide what's essential, not politicians." Hundreds of protesters took part in demonstrations across the state of Nevada, and many were seen holding signs in support of President Trump. Residents accused their Democratic governor of fueling the current unemployment epidemic in the state.
Governor Sisolak is responsible for the shutdown of the economy in Nevada. Period. We're a tourism-based economy, and he effectively shut it down, putting at least 1 out of 10 Nevadans out of work. It's unacceptable.
Now, while Trump took to Twitter to express his support for what he called the liberation of Michigan, Minnesota, and Virginia, all states with Democratic governors, not all of the protests were in support of the president and his policies. Activists delivered fake body bags complete with death certificates that displayed Trump's signature to the San Francisco Federal Building in California and to the Trump International Hotel in New York City as their way to condemn his administration's response to the virus. Now, despite the stay-at-home orders and the presence of police on the ground, protests were largely peaceful as the nation tackles the question of how to deal with record-breaking unemployment in the face of a global pandemic. Reporting in the newsroom, Rachel Blevins, RT.
Across the country, a growing trend of Americans foregoing local and state orders to remain at home, taking to their state's capital to protest lockdown measures meant to curb the spread of coronavirus. It would appear that those demonstrators and those who criticize them fall right down party lines. Joining in on this discussion, our panel today in Michigan, conservative radio host and broadcaster Steve Gruber, and then host of Watching the Hawks, Tyrell Ventura, weigh in. So, Steve, over to you first. You went to the Lansing protest to cover it for your show. We saw the footage, some of these folks toting guns, some wearing face masks, none really observing the social distancing guidelines. I mean, what are we, these outside observers, what are we missing here?
Well, accurate reporting would be a start. Let's start with the fact there were about 40,000 people in Lansing on Wednesday, April the 15th, the vast majority of which were in their automobiles. A couple of hundred went up on the lawn of the state capitol, yes, and there were some guns and some folks that didn't have face masks on. But the vast majority of the folks were there for Operation Gridlock, shutting down the capital city, tens of thousands in their cars, honking their horns, their businesses displayed on the sides of their vehicles, be it HVAC businesses, lawn and garden companies, golfing resorts, and so forth, saying, "Governor, open our state back up." And so what you saw on TV is a distraction, a very small sample. What you really saw were people there protesting the shutdown of Michigan. 1.2 million jobs have been lost in Michigan thus far, 22 million around the country. The economic devastation from this COVID-19 pandemic will reach for years to come. And this hasn't been done by a virus. It's been done by politicians like governors who decided to shut down their states and then remain shut down, even though the models continue to fail. The models that Governor Whitmer said on March the 23rd predicted 7 million people in Michigan would be sick. 1 million would need the hospital. Certainly not true. She said it came from a University of Michigan study. I've not been able to find such a study. The point is, other states are ready to open now. Georgia is opening. South Carolina, Alabama, Ohio probably. Florida could open. Because these governors realize that if you continue to shut everything down, the devastation will go on for a very long time.
And Ty, it appears as though Trump supporters are the folks rallying, urging President Trump to reopen America. Meanwhile, Dems are protesting in the other direction, saying he's not doing enough to protect Americans. He's stuck between a rock and a hard place. So what do you make of these demonstrations?
What do I make of these demonstrations? Well, it breaks my heart because what I see is a lot of people out there who are, kind of lemmings who are following, the great leader syndrome.
Please.
At the end of the day, the sad thing is these are people who are scared. These are people who are afraid. These are people who see, their bank accounts dwindling in the light of having to stay at home, and they're in the fear and denial and anger stage of what happens when you're dealing with an issue like this. And the sad thing is you have a lot of people out there who aren't scientists, aren't doctors, aren't epidemiologists, telling them, no, you can go back to work. It's okay if we lose a few for the good of the economy. And at the end of the day, I will never put the healthiness of an economy above the healthiness of my fellow man. And as far as the liberty of fighting for liberty and we want our liberties back, well, there's also the liberty of I would like my liberty not to get sick. The same as, I would like my pursuit of happiness in life not to be infringed by those who would open too soon in the face of all this. At the end of the day, we are facing a pandemic. It's a virus. It's not a terrorist cell. It's a virus with one mission and one mission only, and that is to get you sick. And until you get that under control, until you have proper testing and a vaccine, which is still probably more than a year away, you are never going to be safe. And you have to treat it as such and listen to those that know.
And now, Steve, I'll let you respond to that. But in your state, I read a couple of polls that it seems like the majority of people in Michigan are happy with this lockdown. They want to continue it.
Absolutely not. And Tyrell, you should go back and hide back under your couch where you belong. I won't live in fear. We're not going to live in fear in Michigan. And the idea that somehow this breaks along party lines is absolutely absurd. I talked to a cardiologist here at a local hospital just this week. He has 0 patients in his cardiac ward. Why? Because hospitals are closed to all patients except COVID-19 patients. And that's affected Detroit, but other hospitals around the state are empty, laying people off. Detroit Medical Center furloughing 450 just a couple of days ago. The devastation also extends to dentists and business owners, all closed because of these orders from the governor. And the fact of the matter is there may never be a vaccine. We need to learn to live with this virus effectively, not hiding under our couch, not living in fear. And let me be clear about this. Your mental health, your physical health, your well-being, that's not my responsibility. If you're immunodeficient, then please take steps to protect yourself. If you're a vulnerable person, please take steps to protect yourself. But don't expect the world to sacrifice their job, their career, their families, the food on their tables so that you can live in fear. If you're afraid, I'm sorry.
Okay, Steve.
But the models have failed.
Steve,
the models have absolutely failed, and that's the bottom line.
Have the models failed, Steve, or the models actually are, or should we be celebrating the fact that they failed because we've been able to stay home, because we've been able to protect ourselves? Maybe that's why the models are failing.
And
maybe the moment that you actually stop wanting to sacrifice your brothers and sisters across this country to a virus, to an economy that doesn't suit them, that doesn't work for them, that's not there for them, it's only for the 1% of this country, then maybe you'll actually grow a heart and actually care about your brothers and sisters.
On that note, Tyrell, you bring up a good point. A lot of people are hurting right now, not from the coronavirus. They're hurting financially. There's a lot of people who these stimulus checks will not reach or their money will be garnished for various reasons. Some of these folks are day-by-day cash workers. A disproportionate number of them are black and brown people. So, Steve, you don't really tend to see those people on the protest line. Why not?
those people were there at the protest line. Again, you need accurate coverage of what was going on. There were tens of thousands of people there covering all spectrums, all races, all age groups. Everybody was there because they realized that the real devastation is that poverty, and poverty kills. Alcohol abuse, drug abuse, suicide. Sheriffs in this state are backing up behind the people, saying they will not enforce these ridiculous, unconstitutional orders because they've seen things like 30% increases in domestic violence calls. Children that would normally be in school are home facing abusers that now don't have jobs, and therefore child abuse is up, domestic abuse is up, alcohol abuse, drug abuse, and yes, suicides. The real price of this pandemic doesn't come from the virus. It comes from politicians. That's the bottom line. And you can argue about it and try to justify it why it's okay about staying alive. But a lot of these folks, well, if they lose their job and lose their marriage and lose their home, maybe there's not much left to live for anyway.
Ty,
so let's talk about the
respond.
real price that's being paid across this country.
Well, I think here's the very easy, simplest take you can take is it an economy and is it a government worth keeping if it cannot protect you within 4 weeks? If it can't exist without everything falling to pieces, without our leadership falling to pieces, without our politicians falling to pieces, if it can't exist by keeping its people safe for a few months by saying, hey, stay home from work, be safe, we'll take care of you during this time. If it can't do that, then is it an economy worth keeping? Is it a government worth keeping? By and large, Nancy Pelosi, Donald Trump, Mitch McConnell, they failed the American people, and ultimately, in my opinion, they are responsible for the upwards of 40,000 deaths that our brothers and sisters, our fellow citizens have faced. And sir, don't ever ever question whether I'm a coward or not again. I am honorable and I'm brave enough to admit that I care about my fellow citizens, and I don't want to condemn them to die for the Wall Street's bottom line.
All right, gentlemen, I got to
cut it. For Wall Street's bottom line, we're doing for the small business person and the individual who's lost their job. 1.5 million in Michigan, 22 million across the country. The real penalty here is poverty, and poverty kills more than this virus ever will.
All right, I got to leave it right there, guys. Steve Gruber and Tyrell Ventura, a lot more to be discussed here. Thank you so much for weighing in on this.
Thank you.
Thank you.